So it is August 27th, 2020 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And this is Meditation and Attachment, Deepening Your Practice. And we've been talking about the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta for the last few weeks. And I've been talking about the Dhammas for the last 2 weeks. But I never read the text about that because I wanted to cover the material itself. And so I thought that I would begin and read some of the text. It's, I don't know, probably 25 minutes of text. So we'll see how far we get. And how, monks, does he, in regard to Dhammas, abide contemplating Dhammas? Here, in regard to Dhammas, he abides contemplating Dhammas in terms of the 5 hindrances. And how does he regard the Dhammas abide? And how does he, in regard to Dhammas, abide contemplating Dhammas in terms of the 5 hindrances? If sensual desire is present in him, he knows there is sensual desire in me. Sensual desire is not present in him. He knows there is no sensual desire in me. He knows how unrisen sensual desire can arise, how arisen sensual desire can be removed, and how a future arising of removed sensual desire can be prevented. If aversion is present, he knows there is aversion in me, and it repeats in much the same way. If sloth and torpor is present, he knows sloth and torpor is present. If restlessness and worry is present, he knows restlessness and worry is present. If doubt is present, he knows there is doubt. In this way, in regard to Dhammas, he abides contemplating Dhammas internally, and externally. He abides contemplating the nature of arising, of passing away, of both arising and passing away in Dhammas. Mindfulness that there are Dhammas is established and to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. And he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how, in regard to Dhammas, he abides contemplating Dhammas in terms of the 5 hindrances. So that last piece is the refrain. In Dhammas, we go through a series of lists: the hindrances, the aggregates, the sense spheres, the awakening factors, the noble truths, again, monks, in regard to Dhammas, he abides contemplating Dhammas in terms of the 5 aggregates of clinging. And how does he regard Dhammas? And how does he, in regard to Dhammas, abide contemplating Dhammas in terms of the 5 aggregates? Here he knows there is material form, such its arising, such its passing away. There is feeling, such as arising, such as its passing away, such as cognition, such its arising, such its passing away. There are volitions, such as their arising, such their passing away. There is consciousness, such its arising, such its passing away. And and in this way, in regard to Dhammas, he abides contemplating Dhammas internally, externally, and externally, and so forth. Again, monks, in regard to Dhammas, he abides contemplating Dhammas in terms of the 6 internal and external sense spheres. And how does he, in regard to Dhammas, abide contemplating Dhammas in terms of the 6 internal and external sense spheres? Here he knows the I, he knows form, he knows the fetter that arises dependent on both, and he also knows how an unarisen fetter can arise, how an arisen fetter can be removed, and how a future arising of the removed fetter can be prevented. He knows the ear, he knows the nose, he knows the tongue, he knows the body, he knows the mind. Awakening factors. Again, monks, in regard to Dhammas, he abides contemplating Dhammas in terms of the 7 awakening factors. Here, if the mindfulness awakening factor is present, he knows it. If the investigations of Dhamma Dhamma's awakening factor is present, he knows it. If the energy awakening factor is present in him, he knows it. If the joy awakening factor is present in him, he knows it. If the tranquility awakening factor is present in him, he knows it. We have a limited number of pronouns that come up in this text. If the concentration awakening factor is present in him, he knows it. If the equanimity awakening factor is present in him, he knows it. Contemplating the Dhammas internally, externally, and externally. Four Noble Truths, again, in regard to Dhammas, he abides contemplating Dhammas in terms of the Four Noble Truths. He knows as it really is. This is dukkha. He knows as it really is. This is the arising of dukkha. He knows as it really is the cessation of dukkha. And he knows as it really is, this is the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. And then the refrain, and then monks, if anyone should develop these four Satipaṭṭhānas in such a way for 7 years, one of two fruits could be expected for him, either final knowledge here and now, or if there is a trace of clinging left, non-returning, let alone 7 years, 6 years, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 7 months, 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, half a month. If anyone should develop these four Satipaṭṭhānas in such a way for 7 days, one of two fruits could be expected him, either final knowledge here and now, or there is a trace of clinging left, non-returning. So it is, with reference to this, it is said, monks, this is the direct path for purification of being, for surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of dukkha and discontent, for acquiring the true method for the realization of nibbana, namely the four Satipaṭṭhānas. This is what the Blessed One said. The monks are satisfied and delighted with the Blessed One's words. So I kind of flipped that a little bit, but one of the things that I think that as we organize our practice, we need to consider what it is that we're doing in terms of the practice, and in what way is a good way to do it so that we can make sense out of what it is that the practice is intended to take you toward. We learn the basic ability to meditate, so this collection of techniques. One of the things that stands out about this is that the way that you practice tends to lead to the kinds of insights that you have from practicing. And so that if you don't organize your practice particularly, or you don't have a direction set for it, the kind of insights that you can find in the practice tend to be repetitive and may not actually be the insights that are necessary to lead you to a place of less suffering. And so some understanding of what the teaching is and what it's intended to show you is a good idea. The Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta is the canonical expression of the Buddha in terms of how to practice. And in all of the centuries since then, there have been different commentaries and different expressions of how one might practice to get there. And this is really based on the Theravada view of things. The Zen view is quite different. The Tibetan view is quite different. There's multiple lineages in both of the other vehicles. In the beginning, I think we come to practice for a particular reason and seem to be able to identify in the idea of practicing meditation that the thing that we want to get out of it is available to us if we practice in that way. One of the things about practice is that it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resources. And so if you can organize the practice in such a way that you're really getting the thing out of it that you want to get out of it, it seems more worthwhile to continue to practice and to put the necessary resources into doing that practice. In the West, in the beginning, of course, it came over mainly as a retreat practice, not so much as a householder practice, just as a daily householder practice, I guess is what I mean. And so to find time, energy, and resources to go to a retreat and sit is a substantial commitment to the practice. In the West, I always just to say this story because when I came to practice, what I wanted was enlightenment. That's what I thought would be the thing. And I wanted it because I thought that it would relieve the problems that I had in my life. This was, of course, a complete misunderstanding of what enlightenment was, but nonetheless, it was the thing that was motivating me to come to practice. In the first introduction to Vipassana class I took at Ordinary Dharma in Venice with Catriona Reed, this would be in, say, 92. When all the students went around the room and were asked why it is that you came, I said I wanted to be enlightened, and the room filled with laughter, but it wasn't a good kind of laughter. It was the kind of laughter that suggested that that was an unreasonable pursuit in meditation, and it felt uncomfortable. And so I continued to look for different teachers who were more oriented toward that, and that's how I ended up with Shinzen. And I'm currently also studying with Dan Brown, who's also has this idea that enlightenment is available for householders. And so when you read the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, it does suggest that if you practice in the way that it's laid out and organized, that you will have this outcome. But the practices themselves, as a person who likes a lot of instructions and a lot of structure and guidance in terms of the kind of practice I do, seem a little soft to me. And also, not providing the kind of relief on the path itself that I guess makes the ordinariness of householder existence bearable enough. I think that 20 years ago or so, life was very difficult for me at the time. So, in studying with Shinzen, his approach was to provide meditative experiences, simple instructions that provided meditative experiences so that you had a sense that you were getting somewhere. And then to move you along in that traditional, well, I think he encapsulated it as a traditional Theravada path, even though really I think what he teaches is more a mashup of all three of the lineages. Laura, you have a question? Nope. There is a little blue hand there. All right, if you come back, let me know. But if I were to take it out of the canonical text and just describe it as what it is that we want to be able to see clearly in the practice of meditation, is that we have this range of sensing experiences, 6 senses: touching, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and mind, and that gathers data from the world outside. And then we process that data internally, and we assign meaning to it, and then we create the perception of the world and the perception of self, conceptual reality. And that we can really make it in any way that we want to. And so we begin to try and see clearly what it is that we're actually sensing, and remove the distortions from it, and create and view the experience of conceptual reality as a fairly pure reflection of what's actually happening out there. We then begin to want to explore how conditioning affects the way that we create conceptual reality. So exploring what that perceptual database is that we use to create the perception of the world as we experience it. And then to begin to work out some of the distortions that might be built into the database itself, so that we can be actually present in the experience as it's happening in the present moment and respond from that place. The Buddhist word in English, or the English translation of of that process, is we attach to things. And in attaching to the sensing experience, fixate it into the perception of something solid. So the object that can be sensed and the capacity to sense it, have contact, the consciousness of that sensing experience arises. The body-mind evaluates it for urgency. That's kind of how I like to frame it. If it's urgent, it goes to the head of the line and gets attention immediately. If it's not important, probably doesn't get into consciousness. And then if it's pleasant and there's time to explore the pleasant aspect, it'll enter into consciousness. Then that undifferentiated, unfixated experience is compared to the perceptual database. And if there's a close enough match, then the meaning of that conditioned experience attaches to the present moment. And conceptual reality is then projected outward and fills what appears to be the space outside. But how do you see clearly how the conditioned responses to things inform the way that you shape the world and also the experience of self? And that's what these meditation instructions are meant to do, to really tune you into that experience of how you're making things out of the data that you're taking in. As you begin to explore it, I think what you also begin to notice is that imagination plays a piece in this, and how open and flexible is the imagination in filling in the spaces between what is happening in the present moment and what you may already have experienced. This is one of the ways that we get caught up in samsara. We keep making the present moment in the way that we have experienced it previously, and it loses the potentialities of the present moment in making it into a resemblance of things that have already happened. As you go deeper and deeper into this process, and in the meditation process itself, this is really what we're intending to watch, is how we select the sensing moments and then form them into the string of data that we then use to make up this conceptual reality. To see first, of course, that this is just the activity of the body-mind. There is nobody doing this. That perception of the self is just another piece of conceptual reality that you've created out of the same sensing experience that you make everything else out of. That the sensing experience really doesn't last. Nothing really lasts. We have this concept of the present moment, but actually we really don't know anything besides the present moment. And so the construction of time even becomes something that is made up and created as conceptual reality. Can you then slip into this place of timelessness where you're simply being in this flow of sensing experience, and that you actually don't have to fixate anything in that flow of sensing experience. It can just be the sensing. And then when you need to interact with the environment or interact with people around you, solidify it and make it into a world that's communicative between people, and also that you can navigate. As you watch the sensing experience and notice how it gathers the information, what you begin to notice is that even the collection of sensing is conditioned, that you pay attention to things that have high value to you and you don't pay attention to things that don't have high value to you. And so you keep creating over and over again the perception of self and world based on your conditioned interests of what has more value to you than what doesn't have more value to you. And so it's a highly selective grab of different sense points that you then use to make the world. And then you can investigate the conditioning around that. An example of that would be that as a child, certain behaviors elicited a response from your caregivers that you wanted, and certain behaviors didn't elicit the response that you wanted, and so you began to place value on the activity that got you the response that you wanted, and that conditioned the kind of responses that you have now, even though the conditions of childhood are long gone, and the things that didn't get you the things that you wanted have less value. And so you get into that samsaric rut of just doing the things that you're conditioned to think will get the thing that you want, even though there's a full range of other possibilities there, many of which you may not have investigated to know whether they would be successful or not. In the present moment exists all of the potentialities, any of the choices that you might make, but we select through this conditioned process of what has value to us and assign it to the whole range of potentialities, and tend to pick over and over again these same limited array of choices, which tends to reinforce the sense of value that they have. So part of this is to really open up and experience everything that's here, all of those potentialities, and be free to choose whichever one might be the most skillful in the moment. One of the things about the conundrum of the human condition is that the complexity of the outcome of the choices that you make is beyond our ability to comprehend it in enough time to affect the kind of choice that you make. We tend to, early in the practice perhaps, or without too much insight, assume that we're making a choice that's deliberate and well-reasoned when it may be just the conditioned response. All of these processes, of course, are unconscious and precede the moment when it enters consciousness and you know the choice that you're about to make, or that you've made the choice. So in this gradual development of clarity around what's happening in the present moment, you become more and more sensitive to all of these conditions that are affecting that process, and you begin to move through the perceptual database and clear out the unskillful conditioned responses and replace them with skillful responses, because all of that processing is unconscious, and really consciousness is there just to, in the last ditch moment, abandon an unskillful choice. It isn't the thing that really goes through the process of creating what that choice will be. This is all making sense. I'm trying to describe this in a way. In the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, in all of the different descriptions of body, of feeling tone, of mind, of dhammas, all of these different things are set up for you to be able to monitor. The aspect of diligence, so the balance of energy, sensory clarity, mindfulness, and concentration as the basic skill set of meditation. You develop these individually, and then once you have dexterity with them, you can begin to manage them as a whole group. And that's the basic meditation stance. And then you can turn your attention to begin to explore these different aspects of your own conditioning, and to begin to evaluate whether there's skillful conditioning there or unskillful conditioning there, and begin to root out the unskillful conditioning and reinforce the skillful conditioning, or develop additional skills that are necessary so that in that flow of being, the conditioned experience that you have produces over and over again these skillful choices, which then puts you on a trajectory of good karma, say. Ray Kurzweil, who's a confabulist, I don't know if you've read anything of him, he projects into the future what he thinks technology can do. And in talking about this conundrum of potentialities, consider in the present moment all of the potentialities that you have, all of the possibilities that you could choose, all being present, and choosing one of them. That becomes the trajectory, the thing that's happening, and all of the other possibilities fall away. But in that moment, it opens up all of the potentialities in that moment. And then you choose one and you move to the next one. All of those potentialities open up. All of the other ones have fallen away. But the order of magnitude of complication to be able to predict very, very far down the way is just impossible. Ray Kurzweil speculated that if you converted all of the matter in the known universes into computing machines, it would take them 1,000 years to calculate the movement of a single atom through an inch of water. But that your smartphone has enough computing power to, in reverse, calculate the trajectory that the atom took. And so we're very good at creating stories and narratives that explain this process of how we move through the world and how people affect us. And so really coming into this place of understanding that we don't have that narrative that's so satisfying in the moment that we need to select from the potentialities that are there. And so we need to condition ourselves so that we have this skillful capacity to move over and over again into an ethical stance in the world, I guess is a good way to put it. Dan talks about not necessarily choosing if you don't need to in the moment. Letting each of those moments flow by, taking in what's happening and not necessarily fixating it as if everything that you're experiencing is like somebody writing something on water. That only when you need to fixate do you then create the experience of self and world. So this idea that you can come out of that habit, we by the time we're old enough to practice, really, I would think, particularly in the West, the habit of fixating things and making things solid is so deeply ingrained that there's no freedom at all whether we do it or not. We're just habitually doing it. And then to move to this place where there's actual freedom in whether you do that or not, and can just exist and just be in this constant flow of experience. Why would that be of interest? And I think the main reason is why it's because it's free of suffering. There's very little, if any, suffering in that. And the ability to move between that unfixated state and the fixated state creates an experience of very little suffering, which in some sense may be what I was really coming to at the beginning when I thought that enlightenment meant that there would be no difficulties in life anymore. Is that making sense in terms of why to do that? So then, how is it that one practices in that way? And one of the practices that I found to be so illustrative of this is called the Ideal Parent Figure Protocol, which Dan Brown developed. Because it allows you the exercise of creating a version of conceptual reality and to begin to see how you do it, so that you have these links to the actual outcome of the conditioning that you have. Because it's so easy to create these explanatory narratives in reverse, we can often obscure the things that are difficult or uncomfortable, that we don't want to really know or engage about ourselves, and bypass them with these narratives that we create. But when you come into the experience of watching the process of creating a version of, or imagined version of conceptual reality, you can see how these biases and these conditioned responses affect your ability to do that, which in a way links you very quickly to a understanding of how your conditioning went. And it has a real sharp capacity to bypass the alterations of narrative that the cognitive mind can create to shield ourselves from the conditioned experiences that we don't want to know about. Is that making sense? As a description of why one might consider this practice. One of the things that became evident to me in doing this particular practice was that the capacity to imagine some things gets pinched off. I like to use the word pinched because it describes that flow. So imagination, imagining self and world, and imagining exchanges and communications and all of the rest of the capacities of this function of being human can be actually limited. Your conditioning can play a part in limiting it. If in childhood you want something over and over again and that you can't get, you begin to not imagine that you want it because it saves you the disappointment of not getting it over and over again. And you can begin to see how your capacity to imagine the kind of life you might like to have, or the way that you might be in the world is limited, and so you can't figure out what to do in order to move yourself in that direction. In attachment terms, and I like to talk about that here because it is meditation and attachment, but these two primary mechanisms that define the human condition. One is the attachment mechanism that goes off. When we're frightened or we feel that we're in danger, the attachment mechanism goes off, and it provides us with the capacity to seek safety and connection to somebody who will protect us. In childhood, of course, it's the caregivers, if you have that idea about them. And in the adult life, it is the relationships that you bring close to you, the people that you rely on, that you turn to when that sense of abandonment or that sense of danger arises, that you can seek immediate proximity to so that they'll help you, they'll protect you. But the other mechanism that's so primary is exploration. And in secure functioning individuals, the dynamic relationship between attachment and exploration are operational. If the attachment mechanism goes off, it's very likely that the exploration mechanism will go off because you're retreating, you're seeking comfort. And if the exploration mechanism is on, it's likely that the attachment mechanism is off. so that you're free to go and explore and discover things and find meaning. And so you want to have this integrated dance of them back and forth, and depending on your conditioning in childhood, that may not be operational. Some people's attachment mechanism goes off, but their exploration mechanism doesn't. Some people's exploration goes off and their attachment doesn't. And it creates these perceptions of the world. And so one of the things about view is that the views come on really early, earlier than the autobiographical memory comes on, earlier than the capacity to experience the sense of self and orient it that way. And so you can be caught up and convinced by the nature of the views that you've created so early in your life and not be able to see through them. And so efficiency is always a good thing for me, because I tend to be an impatient person. Any kind of technique that would really illustrate this quick has a strong appeal to me. I think that's one of the reasons why I like this one so much. It's very efficient and really points out the nature of this. So I thought tonight, in reviewing the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta and understanding the nature of the exploration that's meant to create a deliverance from suffering into this place of freedom, that we use the ideal parent figure meditation as a way of examining how that process of selecting the sensing experiences and then creating them into conceptual reality, which I think is the ultimate goal of all of this, can happen. I will do the guidance in such a way that you don't really need any preliminary for it, but any questions before we begin? So what was that like? That bad?
George?
Yes.
I had a really hard time imagining being held.
Uh-huh.
Or any sort of physical contact. It was hard for me to manifest any sort of audio or visual experience with that.
Uh-huh.
I tried to place myself or give myself an idea of what an ideal mother figure would be. I was oddly a little more successful with an ideal father figure, but that was really, which is surprising, but that was hard. So I felt like I was I felt like I was an ugly baby, and so
that was the reason nobody wanted to pick you up.
Exactly.
So that would be the example of the reverse engineering that I was talking about there.
Or I was like, I'm gay, and so like my mom or my dad's like
Yeah, 42 seconds after you're born, they immediately recognized that you were gay and didn't want to pick you up.
Yeah. Thank you.
So what I'm trying to get at here is we make these narratives that explain all of this stuff to us. And then when you begin to examine this in detail, in terms of how you're able to construct it, this is a demand question, right? So I'm asking you to come up with something, and you're searching your database for a way to come up with it, and there's no entries in your database for having been held, so how do you imagine that? And then so you can't use entries that aren't there, right? But then maybe you could imagine what that would be like, except that then we begin to get in touch with the pinches on the imagination, that you limited your imagination around being held perhaps as a child because you couldn't get it. and it was less painful not to imagine wanting it. And then as an adult later, when that seems like a sort of natural thing, even that's difficult to do. And so this begins to illustrate the nature of the database that we're using to create conceptual reality in a way that's very efficient, if you follow my drift on this. And then we can begin to dismantle those narratives, right? I must have been an ugly baby, or I was a gay baby that they recognized immediately, and their aversion to those things are what caused that. And so we want to just take those apart. It is a very ordinary conditioned response that is handed down from caregiver to infant around physical contact. And it probably has more to do with the experience that they had themselves and took in. And because they never dissembled it, deconstructed it, they were just transmitting it. And you got it, and you have a good picture of what it is. And also to understand that it's changeable, which I think is really the hopeful piece. So thank you for saying that. Someone else?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I think I was offended initially, not at you, just offended at the concept of needing a father figure.
Yeah.
And then I was, well, let me just make an attempt at this. And I think I just kind of envisioned the universe, a cluster of stars, as the father figure. It was a bizarre frame of reference of trying to come up with a father figure, so it turned out to be the universe. Cluster of stars. I have no idea.
And was there a father figure available to you when you were a child?
Not really.
Okay. So it's a kind of an absence of conditioning rather than a reaction to conditioning.
Correct.
Yeah, good. Hi.
So I was able to get to a safe place. That seemed very easy.
To
get to.
And what was that like?
Well, it was actually surprising. I hadn't thought of this place in years. It was a place that was behind my home. I was on a golf course, and I was like, oh, it was this. Can't even explain it. It was like this thing that would turn around that the golfers would be on. Would spin, and I was like, oh, this is great. And it felt, but I was alone.
Right.
And that felt safe, and I felt protected. And then when we moved into maybe seeing me as a child, I was able to do that. But as soon as you started to talk about mothers and fathers, I think I went into some sort of like dissociative state, because I was like so like dropped in that I couldn't even think.
Right.
All just in body, but like nothing going on in the mind.
Right. And so there were no good entries to use.
There was nothing.
So then that's when we would expect the imagination to kick in, and then we begin to see that the imagination has been limited in certain areas, in other areas it's not, and so you can actually push into that and open the memory up, and so that you can then begin to fill that in. Why is that useful in life? Because we're often in situations where we've not been quite in them before, and if we can really imagine our way to navigate it, we can be much more skillful at it. Good. Someone else?
Yeah, I could share. I think I was like you mentioned like the reverse engineering process, and I think that was very frustrating for me through almost the entire process. Like coming up with like my safe place was like it was like a real memory of like a friend's, you know, like treehouse type place.
Right.
But then when you started getting, but then I started thinking, oh, well, it'd be nice if there was an Apple II computer there, because then I would have experience with computers at an early age, and that would help me, you know, like wanting things to be advantageous to me later on in life, you know,
Right.
which is something I always, which is, I don't know, maybe some sort of weird feeling of
Well, and can
inadequacy
you
or something.
deconstruct where that would have come from? Which sounds like a pressure to achieve to me if I were analyzing it. Right?
Yeah, and when I was visualizing my parents, like love from them was them being like at a certain level of success. It was very abstract. I couldn't come up with what they were doing, but they were sort of living by example, like, you know, this example that I, you know, was trying to grab for.
Yeah.
But it was generally frustrating because I felt like most of my references were from like Steven Spielberg movies, pop culture. So yeah, the imagination, you know, or else there was nothing. Like I definitely relate to the nothing thing too.
Yeah, good. So I really like this as a meditation because it really points all of these things out pretty quick, you know. And you begin to get a sense of it so that you then really can explore what's there, right? Because you're using that database to create the reality that you live in, that conceptual piece. And you can begin to explore it, evaluate what's skillful, what's unskillful. You can abandon the unskillful, and then often you'll come up with a deficit of skill, and so then you'll have to begin to develop that skill in order to replace the unskillful thing that you're abandoning, so that you keep moving yourself in this direction of being much, much more skillfully oriented toward responding. And so you can move into this flow of being, and the actions that you take over and over again tend to be much more skillful in that way of being, quite free. Good. Someone else?
I'll talk for a minute.
Okay.
It's my first time here, but it's been kind of a weird evening because I will tell you that for the first part of the meditation, it is exactly what I did on my own yesterday.
Oh.
And I have a very thin data file on my childhood, very thin. And so it was easy to find a safe place. That was my grandmother's house. Yes, that was conditioned.
Yeah.
It was actual experience. But I will tell you that when I got there, in my emotional time travel machine, I put it on pause and said, as compassionately and neutrally as I could, what's this feel like? And the first thought I had, which is an executive level thought, was, oh, so this is what it means to be a securely attached child. And because the words you used, the freedom to explore, the safety, all of that, I got it. And I know because I'm knowing it,
Right.
that I have lived it. As far as the idealized parents, forget about it. My mother kidnapped me when I was about 7. And so I had no father figure, literally, in my life till about the age of 11. And by that time, it was too late.
Yeah.
And from a conditioning point of view, there was none. My mother had to work a lot. And so I was a latchkey kid from the get-go. And so there was a failure of imagination. Some people have talked about. I kept thinking, well, I wanted my dad to be Gregory Peck, quite frankly. He was the kind of guy that I looked up to, and Atticus Finch, that kind
indeed.
of character.
It's exactly where my mind went.
But that was against what you were trying to prove here, and I recognized that and I appreciated it. And so I stopped. There was nothing there. There was nothing there. So.
And the imagination couldn't do it.
Not in that respect, no, not at all.
So then it's pinched off. And so we want to put pressure on it so it opens up again, and then you can imagine it. That's the idea.
Yep. So that's what I got tonight anyway.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I wanted to chime in that I also had a celebrity parent that I am. Why not? If you can. I'm a fiance for my mother, so I don't
know. Well, I have to say, it was very, for the longest time, my ideal parent figures were drawings, black and white drawings, like from a 40s magazine illustration. And they gradually got a watercolor wash and then became 3D.
So my favorite book growing up, I would just add this and then stop, it was Swiss Family Robinson. Not the Disney movie, but the actual book with the perfect family. Mom, dad, sis, the animals, the island. I must have read that book 10 times. So that's just, but there was no visuals to go with that, so it was just in my mind.
Nice. I read it as well, but it was an illustrated version. All right. So thank you all for coming. I hope that was helpful. It's a little unorthodox, but I find it extremely effective. We're going to switch starting next week in this class to some compassion practice. We've been doing the Vipassana side for quite a while, and so now we're going to do some art practices. Tuesday night, we're just coming to the end of the cycle of the beginning series, so if you want to touch in there. In September, I'm starting a level 1 class. If you haven't done the meditation and attachment, we're going to do a series of 3 level 1 classes, and then a day. These are day-longs on Saturday, and then a day-long on secure functioning relationships. The day-longs on the Dharma maps are still going. So the first, I think, Saturday is the level 1, and the third Saturday is the Dharma map class. We're going to start a level 2 class at the end of October, the beginning of November. And for the first time, we're going to do something which we haven't done before, which is offer it for both 7:30 Pacific time and 7:30 East Coast time. So if you're out east and you want to tune in and not have to stay up until 12:30, we're going to do back-to-back level 2s, one for 7:30 East Coast time and one 7:30 for West Coast time. And then we have a virtual retreat coming up the week between Christmas and New Year's, 6 days. We're changing the format on that. We used to do a sort of pay for the retreat and then do dana, but with the virtual retreat, it's confusing. And so we're just charging a flat rate for the retreat with no dana for the first time and see how that goes. We do have scholarship money available for the level 2 and also for the retreat. So the retreat is limited to 24 places. It's likely to fill up. The retreat we did this fall did fill up. So if that's something that's interesting, you take a look and sign up. I offer the class on a dana basis, which means I just teach it and then you can come and partake in it. I do hope that you'll support it by making a donation. That helps support me, and also it helps support Mettagroup and the work that we're doing. There was a link in the email you received. Also, there's a link on the website. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, George.
Thank you, George.
Bye.